Hey, Joey, good morning. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, Michael, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
It is very much my pleasure, and I am excited for what we're going to talk about today. It's an important topic, I think pretty serious topic too, or topics. And people might notice, well, he's not wearing a hockey jersey or some kind of jersey today. And I thought, well, let's keep it a little more professional and serious. And I'll get into that in a second, especially related to your background. So before we dive into that, starting with your background, how you got started, where your interest in sport in general came from, I just wanted to give the audience an idea of the ideal outcome for today's episode. And actually, this works out nicely because this is number 12. And we're going to connect this loosely to number 10 with Zoya, who is helping parents and families in terms of organizationally scheduling their youth sports logistics, we'll call it, an ops. And she talked a lot about like the home team in terms of the family and mindset and how this is important in terms of building life skills related to time management. And then in the prior episode, Nikita, former professional ice hockey player who is now advising younger athletes, developing athletes, primarily hockey players, but not only them, in terms of helping them succeed in their careers here in America. And one of the things that he spoke a lot about was mindset and effort, right? Like being a student of the game. So excited. What's exciting for me is today we're going to speak with yourself, a professional. So you're a clinician and mental performance consultant. You
hmm
also run sports performance recovery. And so we're going to dive into the between the ears for youth athletes, developing athletes from the professional's perspective in terms of the one that is licensed in this field that works with young athletes on a daily basis, and we'll go through it from that perspective. And again, it kind of rounds out the prior two episodes together. Does that sound cool with you?
Sounds perfect.
Sweet. Okay. Before we get into like the evolution of youth sports, which Nikita and I went into also from like the junior level, because he and I met right before we went to college, and helping give recommendations for families and kids and how to just be a rounded individual. Let's start kind of from the beginning in terms of your background. Was there something that an event or series of events or your upbringing that really got you into sports in the first place?
I think I started around like fourth or fifth grade. I really became kind of obsessed with baseball. Was the first love. So I had played growing up. Before that, I wasn't, the star player, and I enjoyed it. But it was around that year. I think it was 2010, 2009, kind of those first Red Sox teams. We were a solid team. I'm from the Boston area. That I really fell in love with the sport. I fell in love with every aspect of it, and that is kind of when things were just getting started, at least from my point of view, when it comes to like competitive club teams, and you could, start to track your stats and get all the gear. I just got into every single aspect of it. The internet was becoming a really big thing then too. So, it had been a big thing, but for me growing up with the internet, I could get into all the little details of baseball and just make it, everything that I cared about in the world back then. So that's how I first fell in love with sports. Boston sports had a lot of success over those years that I was growing up, so it was pretty easy to fall in love with the other sports as well, whether it's the Patriots or the Celtics or whoever else. So growing up, I played baseball mostly, played on club teams competitively going up into high school, and it was always just my thing. That was the thing that I kind of knew myself for.
Couple things fascinating. So one tied to myself, two tied to episode 7 with Jason Acone, also from the Boston area. And he's a bit younger, I think, than us. Yeah, he's a bit younger, but still he grew up in this also era of championships. He joked in his episode that he's that kid at like the Patriots parades with the signs that say like I've been
Yeah.
alive like 12 years and I've seen 12 championships. I believe that like external environment or environment around us here in not just Boston area, you could say New England in general, in terms of this period, I believe has helped a lot of people get very interested in sport. I mean, this city specifically is like, I don't know if this is the right word, maniacal, like crazy
Yeah.
for sports. It is not like anything I've seen or experienced having visited or lived in. other cities. And I find that, again, I'm repeating myself, though, to be fascinating that how much our environment and upbringing early on shapes us, whether we realize it in the moment or not. And it's very much similar for me in terms of my upbringing, getting involved in sports and getting interested in the data aspect, just looking at stats. Like Jason talked about it from a fantasy football perspective. I remember like opening the paper every morning and looking at the box scores of like out of town scores to get a sense of the stats, and thought like the numbers are really cool. So that's really nice that, again, another person from the Boston area. So there's a lot of overlap in terms of what we'll to talk about it in terms of anecdotes if they come up. But from the connection to then your studies and professional career, did that just like naturally lead itself to, I guess, maybe like me, for example, I knew in college, like, I'm not going to be a pro hockey player. I could try. I'll make the bet that it's not going to work out. I got to figure out something with my life and career to make money. Ideally, I'll be able to make money and travel and watch these games and be involved in sport. And now, in terms of my day to day work and then this data and sports platform, get to be involved in sport. But what was your experience like? Like, what really drew you in? Was it something personal? Was it something that you were observing in terms of being around sport your whole life in general?
Yeah, I think a bit of both connection to my own life. So eventually, my baseball career ended. I had to kind of figure out, okay, what do I even care about? What are things that I'm even good at? What are things that I can get joy from besides watching baseball, playing baseball, performing well at baseball. So at the end of high school, that was something that was kind of a crisis for me, was like, wait, this has been the thing that I've poured my entire self into. And now that it's over, what do I do? And what am I left with? And that's a pretty difficult conversation to have with yourself. I also had a lot of anxiety in sports. I was cut from teams, kind of devastated at different ages throughout my life. I would struggle. Baseball is a hugely mental sport. So there's slumps that will happen. The yips are pretty common in baseball. I've had spells of that where, you can't seem to throw it where you want it to go. And it's all just like this tension and pressure that you put on yourself. It's a team sport technically, but it's pretty individual. It's pitcher versus batter most of the time. Most of the plays, the outfielder, it's on you to catch it or else it's an error. And that error stat goes in on your fielding percentage. So it's fairly individual. And I think that can add to the mental load of it. But those things always interested me growing up. I always sort of felt like I could have been better than I was. I'm sure a lot of people say that when they don't
Yes.
maybe make it to the level that they want to, but I definitely felt that way. And then going to college in Boston, getting to stay around, like you said, that sports environment, I was able to find the love for it without maybe being connected to it as a player, right? Like you can still love football if you've never, played a snap. So yeah, it was also like you said, where you just have that love of sports and it's difficult to find a connection professionally. But I felt like pulling on my experience from high school, seeing that there was a bit of a gap in the mental side of the game, at least that the general public knew about. A lot of organizations now will have mental performance coaches, will have psychologists or mental health counselors on staff, but those things aren't really public, especially when I was in college. It's coming out a lot more now with people like Naomi Osaka or AJ Brown or Lane Johnson. People will speak out kind of about the mental health struggles that they have gone through. But at the time, it was definitely a bigger gap than it is now. And I just delved into the world of what sports psychology was, kind of saw what are the degrees that you need for this, what are the certifications, what are the actual jobs that are available to do this. I think everybody kind of dreams of going to work for the Celtics or the Patriots or the Red Sox. And those are still things that I may be aiming for and are still out there. But I ultimately, I think, just wanted to help kids who were like me, who like loved sports, but were really anxious and maybe sometimes didn't have as much fun at sports because of that anxiety or shame after a game, or just would get so angry that they, couldn't even finish the game. And I view sports as having such a positive impact on people's lives if it's gone about in the right way. I think that kids can learn so much about overcoming adversity, can learn so much about like working hard and setting goals and working with others. But I really do think that some sports are set up in a way that, there's so much pressure put onto kids. Some sports are set up in a way where there's so much comparison between people. There's a lot of money that gets pumped into it now. So my aim was to help people like me that I largely have a good relationship with sports, but it was rocky. And there were times where it really, sent me to some low places as well. So trying to help to make sports something that is actually beneficial to as many kids as possible really ended up being my goal once I got to college, and then got out of college, decided to go and pursue this sports psychology field.
Yeah, so you're currently at Riser and Tread, working with athletes, developing programs, the coaches, as well as the parents. And before we get into evolution of youth sports, which you've touched on a bit, and Nikita and I, to an extent, talked about in our episodes, similarly with Zoya, this notion of like anxiety and the experience. It's meant to be a good, positive developmental experience for children, preteens, teens, as we become adults. And from Zoya's lens, it was, again, like all the logistics around it, meaning like what field do you need to be at, who's driving. Like by the time you get in the car, in most cases it's like, sorry, yelling and screaming. I'll rewind. I'll use my own experience and not generalize for anybody else, and comment my own experience growing up as a kid with our family. There was like yelling and screaming, so like by the time you get there, sometimes you don't even want to be there. It's like time to go home, right? Or the ride home could be even worse, but that started from the beginning. And so that's, again, some external factors, some internal within the, what could just call it air quotes, familial environment, because it doesn't always have to be two parents. It could be a grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, neighbor, whomever. So now coming into the evolution of sport, again, when I was playing, it was, I think, quite simple. There was no social media. There was like kind of internet, but still it was like family. It was phone tree, so you had phone tree of like, where's the game? Has it changed? Who's driving? Pretty low tech. And then
Mhm.
now there are so many leagues, never mind at the youth level, like junior hockey is one example, or like developmental soccer, even in America. I don't know what's happened. I mean, partly I haven't been paying attention so much over the years because I've been doing other work. I haven't been here physically. But like from your lens as the professional in this space and the clinician, so the practitioner, what is your take on the evolution of youth sports? Like not just the good, but share some of maybe like the bad or the ugly, as they say, because we want the real picture.
Yeah. Yeah, so as part of my position with Riser and Tread, part of what I do is I try to make partnerships with these sporting organizations, and a lot of them have actually been willing to bring us in. I think mental health being a more visible thing since COVID has really helped, and now organizations are seeing it as, more than just a luxury, but kind of a necessity now. So I think it goes across the spectrum. There's some organizations that are better than other, and there's some positives that have come from the way that youth sports have changed, and there's some negatives as well. One thing that we had kind of brought up was just like the almost moneyballization of youth sports, where everything just seems really professional. When I was growing up, it was kind of like you played on your little league team, on your town team, then you maybe went and played high school, and then if you were pretty solid in high school, then you could go play college. Now it seems like there are just so many options that you kind of almost need to get into now. Like a club sport isn't necessarily a luxury anymore. It's like a necessity as well, where, you know, Timmy, Tommy, and Jimmy, they're all on, elite, premier, select, blah, blah, blah. And if you're,
Yeah.
only on elite tier 1C, then you're not as good. Or maybe as a parent, you're not setting your kid up as well to go pro or to get a scholarship or whatever else. So not only are there so many different organizations to choose from, they're tiered based on price, based on how elite you are as far as on the field. So kids are constantly being evaluated and put into these buckets of what level should they be on. I mean, these things can cost a lot of money for parents. There can be a lot of pressure to kind of keep up with the Joneses of my neighbors are on 3 elite select teams, and I need to get my kid involved with that sort of thing as well.
So Zoya spoke to this very briefly on her episode because she was solving a need that her own family had as a problem or a challenge. But she spoke to how she has 3 daughters. And one of the things she mentioned about this, what you just spoke to in terms of the different club teams, the elites, the travel teams, the commitment, the thing there from her perspective as a parent was, and if so let's say the oldest daughter is on because they're swimmers. The oldest is on a swim team, elite
Mhm.
swim team. The middle daughter started getting recruited at like 2 years before that, before the oldest. It's like they have like a pipeline, but it's not just the individual athlete. They put the family in the pipeline as well, which I believe adds to this from the macro level perspective. And it's
Mhm.
something I would have never fathomed to exist, though that, like you said, it's putting a lot of pressure on not just the athlete, but then the parent to keep up with everyone. And I believe, and this is something that gets talked about from the physical sports performance or human sports performance perspective, is specialization. I
Yeah.
feel, I believe, I observe, maybe the best way to say it is I observe this notion of specialization seems to be happening earlier and earlier and earlier. So well, we'll just give one example. Physically, what can that do as a negative? The Football Science Institute talks about this in terms of studying soccer players or elite soccer players. And the potential issue that exists for soccer is if you specialize in soccer way too early, don't train anything else, and you're only training soccer specific, you're more prone to soft tissue injuries like hamstring as you get older because of just the biomechanics of how you develop, right? And how you train. That's a potential issue. From like the between the ears perspective, what are some of the potential challenges that exist in specializing too early? Other than like you might not actually like the sport.
Yeah. No, it's funny how you said, the example of Zoya's kids is you're recruiting a kid who's like 12 years old, and just like how ridiculous that even sounds, of like a team scouting or recruiting or trying to like sign players that are that young. And I think it just speaks to the professionalization of this whole thing of treating kids like they're pros. One of the things with specialization is, like you had mentioned, I think there's an injury risk. I try to talk to kids and parents about when they're considering specializing, is that you actually miss out on a lot of motor development if you're only practicing that one thing. So by playing multiple sports, you don't just increase your specific skills in that sport, but you can actually increase your overall level of athleticism. And those sort of things can translate to other sports. So people talk about like Patrick Mahomes playing baseball. He kind of plays quarterback like a shortstop. He's running around on the move, he's throwing, that sort of thing. Between the ears, I think the level of burnout that could be associated with early specialization is pretty legitimate. So if you've been playing just the one sport from, age of 6 until age of 18, you may get tired of that eventually, especially if it's at a high level where there's money and statistics and rankings involved. I think kids, that wears on kids after a period of time. You don't learn how to exist in other environments. So if you're, kind of the star on the soccer team, you play soccer all year round, you're around kind of the same type of people, maybe you're around the same coaches your whole life, you're around the same environment, you're not learning those skills of adapting to different and new environments. For example, if you played on the basketball team and maybe you weren't the superstar, well, now you have to learn to sit on the bench. Now you have to learn to like support your teammates. Now you have to learn to kind of play more of a role player type of role, and there's a lot of valuable skills that can be learned from that sort of thing. So you're missing out on the diversity of experience that really helps to take kids and put them through different situations, put them through adversity, that helps them develop those skills for when they're adults to handle those big problems. So I think when you specialize really, really early, there's that burnout risk, and then you're missing out on all the learning opportunities that comes, whether that's motor learning or whether that's kind of social emotional learning from being in different environments as a kid.
Which, by the way, also translates to like being an adult and working in a company or working with people, as we know. And it's something that in the second episode with Jacob, we talked about, where he was a blue chip recruit going into college to play tennis.
Yeah.
And then he had a decision point where he just knew, because there was a teammate he couldn't beat. He's like, I can't beat him. If I played 10 times or 100 times, like I'm not winning. I need to have an alternative path in terms of career, because it being a very individual sport, tennis, and to go pro, it's very difficult unless you have like a bankroll. My words, not Jacob's, a bankroll to support you if you don't have sponsors, because you have to play in these tournaments, get your rankings, coaching, etc. Like he said, like, I'm going to go do something else and transfer my skills from tennis to sales,
Hmm.
which both have a lot of failure that exists. I was like, you're going to be perfect, especially if you have this mindset going into it. And so that's, I believe, what's something that the athlete will miss out on is then later in their career, like you said, how do they get in? How do they thrive in different situations with different types of people where they're not always winning? They could be on the back foot, and just like how do you react to that? And that's very important. It's a lesson that like still I try to learn and act on is okay, what's my role in this situation? Like you want to be the lead, though it doesn't always make sense or it's not the best thing for the team. And so that there's that lesson too that could be missed out. And the last thing I wanted to mention, because I was going through my notes, because the last couple of times I've misquoted Darcy on this, and I actually wanted to quote him correctly. So in the first episode, Darcy Norman, he talked about this notion of how so he's known in the world of football or soccer and performance teams for World Cups for Germany and the US. He's at Chicago Fire now. And he said that like years ago, he was talking to a friend or talking to someone saying how he's like, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. Answering the question, like, what do you do? And that person said, no, you have broad spectrum competency and that has value. And when I heard Darcy speak at a conference in June, so this FSI conference on performance in soccer, I was like, that is amazing. And that also is what early specialization can take away from the athlete is building a foundation of broad spectrum competency, right? To put it in Darcy's terms and connect that dot. Though, I'm curious on your take on this point. I'll use this example because you speak with a lot of parents. I hear, we'll say hockey coaches, they'll say the parents say, my son is the next, pick a player name in the NHL, right?
Yeah.
And they're just like, no, they're not. Like I'm telling you now very candidly, I've played in the NHL. They're not. Just just know that. Like find the role. Oh, we can use an individual sport like golf, because when you were talking about like baseball, like getting your head, like that's me even today as an adult with golf.
Yeah.
Like people probably like you have like the story of like Tiger Woods, right? People don't realize what Tiger Woods went through as a kid with like his father. And so that is an example of like the one out of call it a million where there's success, you make it to the top, but that's not going to be everybody. So then what realistically happens in these like familial environments or even that relationship if it doesn't go to top world success and you're kind of the parent pushing the kid to specialize early? Like, do they burn out faster? Is there then like in the home or home team issues potentially?
Yeah, I think there definitely can be, depending on what the parents' involvement is in sports. I mean, if you imagine like for Tiger Woods or for Venus and Serena Williams, if ever seen any documentaries or movies about them or read anything about their lives, like I don't think it was an especially pleasant experience for them most of the time. And I think they ended up having okay relationships with their parents, but not everyone turns out to be Venus Williams or Tiger Woods. So I think that like that specialization piece that you had mentioned, I think Jacob is a good example. Like eventually there's going to be somebody that you can't beat in a one-on-one tennis match. Eventually you may not actually reach the NHL or reach the PGA Tour. And then what are you left with? Right? So for parents, I think it's to ask yourself as you're interacting with the sport environment with your kid is your goal for them to make the pros? Is your goal for them to go Division 1 so that you don't have to pay for college? Or is your goal for your kid to actually get those life skills, develop that character, go through those adverse experiences during sports so they become more resilient and so they develop those social skills? Because if you do want them to get to the NHL or the NFL, and that's really what's important to you, then specialization, there's an argument to be made for it. Like I think that there are benefits that you get from having all of the best trainers and training your kid year round and having them do conditioning every single morning. There are benefits, like your kid probably will be successful. Will they become Tiger Woods or Venus Williams? I don't necessarily know. And then what is maybe the mental health toll or the relationship toll that's going to come from not only specialization, that's just one part of it. Specialization is not the absolute worst thing in the world, but specialization may be combined with a hyper focus on like rankings and statistics, comparisons to others, a lot of parental pressure on the kid to perform well, kind of seeing the kid just as the athlete and not as the whole person, right? Like if you think that, hey, if I don't shoot under par today, or if I don't win this tournament today, I'm going to go home and my parents are going to be super disappointed in me because they're spending so much money on this coaching that I'm receiving and all this conditioning, and we have to do all this travel for these tournaments. And if I don't perform well, then that means that I'm not living up to what they're hoping for me. And that can be really devastating for a kid. And that can be part of what like drains the enjoyment from participating in that sport.
Yeah, the air quotes moneyballization of youth sports is wild. I mean, I didn't even realize like there's a website on like hockey rankings of club teams, these travel league teams across the country.
For like
And
10 years old, 11
yeah,
years old.
I had asked the person like that told me about this, like what goes into this? Like what's the model? Like it's arbitrary. It's like social voting. I was like, this is outrageous. And to tie it to the prior episode with Nikita, we were talking like the data component of making it, it's the elite level in sport. He was like, the scouts look at stats as like the third thing. It's again,
Mm,
it's like, are you a student of the game? What do you do within the game? What do you do situationally? Do you fit a need they have on the team? What is your role? Can you be versatile? And so this notion of versatility aligns with broad spectrum competency, aligns with being well-rounded. So before we get into the how can kids become well-rounded people and how can their parents help them, I also just want to hit on what you said too about the benefits of specialization. That comes down to habits and foundational structure of doing that boring thing over and over. And to tie to an episode we had with Jesse Green, who's now at 1080 Motion, but he had spent years with the Pittsburgh Penguins and Sacramento Kings in sports performance or human performance. I'd asked him like, me being a hockey fan, what are the top hockey players doing? You don't have to say like, oh, Sidney Crosby does ABC or if Evgeny Malkin does DEF. Like, what do you see that stands out, traveling with them, being with them every day? And he said two things. I think this can maybe lead into two with like the well-rounded identity of the athlete as a person is they ask why. They want to know why you're doing something. There's an intervention or a training or a diet plan, not to question you, right? And I mentioned this in the episode Nikita too. It's not to question, it's they want to empower themselves to know why it's happening so they can then do it. And that ties to the second thing, which is they stack habits. They don't just focus on nutrition and then only focus on recovery and then only focus on the mental and then only focus on conditioning. They just stack them on top of each other and they're very consistent. So that's where like some examples from prior conversations that we've had here that support what you're saying with this notion of there's a balance of
exactly.
specialization and being well-rounded. So then
Exactly.
from your perspective, again, as the clinician and working with parents, how can, from the kids' perspective and even the parents and the family combined help with the child or young adult have a well-rounded identity? Because we have to remember, like, we are many things. Like, I'm not just, a business person, or I'm not just like a brother or a son. I'm many things that make me me, just like is the same for you and everybody else. So how can we help kids with that sort of identity so they have that sense? Because I've learned maybe too late, in my 30s, I think, how important that notion of like identity, self-identity, and like self-worth and value is and like what makes me special and all the positives because I look at the negatives. But how can we help others to not, we'll say, repeat my mistakes or be like me, even though I turned out and I'm pretty okay. But just
Yeah.
to use it as an example.
No, it's a great question, and I'll quickly touch on what you had mentioned just before that. I think it's specialization. The way that youth sports has moved forward is not all a bad thing. It's actually, really great in the instruction that a lot of kids are getting, the quality of coaching they're getting. It's not just your neighbor's dad anymore, which I think can be a good thing for a lot of reasons, but it's just like you said, handle it with care, right? Handle it with a bit of balance. Take as a parent, take a critical eye to the situation and make sure that you are not getting as sucked into all of these numbers and the rankings and how cool it looks that your kid is, on the elite select team, right? So these things can be great in so many ways as long as parents are approaching it with some level of care. And a good way to do that is to view your kid a little bit more holistically and help them develop that well-rounded identity. I think even if you just have that in mind as a parent or as a kid, then you're moving in the right direction. I had said earlier, as a parent, understand why you even want your kid involved in sports. Like, let that inform your decision. If you want your kid to be the next Tiger Woods, or if you want them to go to the NFL, that might inform your decision in one way. If you want your kid to be happy and healthy and to make friends and to become a well developed person, then you're probably going to approach it in another way. And that's not going to say that you're going to do club sports or you're not going to do club sports. You could do them in either situation. But having that in mind, like, what is even the point of sports, and keeping that like kind of 10,000-foot view, I think can be really important. Specialization comes in again, but like, help your kid get a wide variety of experiences. So that could be other sports, that could be performing arts, it could be music, it could be, fine arts, that sort of thing. It could be, I'm trying to think of what other things kids are into. Like, kids are into video games, kids are into movies, kids are into writing and poetry and,
Writing.
hiking, maybe sports that are not team sports or that are not competitively measured, running, weightlifting, being out in nature, those sort of things, other passions that they might have, right? Eventually, all of us, unless you are Tiger Woods, kind of have to move on to some other passion, some other career that you may be interested in. So why not get your kid a sampling of what those things might be, right? For those people that specialize and focus on one sport with the sole goal of making it to the pros or making it to Division 1, I think they really struggle to find what those other things in life that they find to be really important. So if you can expose your kid to a wide variety of experiences and help to lean into what their other passions are, I think those things can set them up really well to build confidence in themselves outside of just sports, right? I'm not just good at baseball. I'm also, actually a really good friend, and I'm a good artist, and I'm funny, and, I'm good at writing, right? So they can discover their other passions, but they can also build confidence and self-esteem in themselves that are outside of just like being the best golfer or being the best baseball player. They can have a bad round, or they can strike out, at the end of the game, but go home and be like, well, like, I can still feel good about myself in the morning because, I have such and such other things that I feel really good about myself. So those would be two big ones right off the bat.
And one way too on the maybe the golf round as an example is you can ask yourself, or as the parent ask the child, what did I learn from this, or what did you learn from this? And
Yes.
so I alluded to this in the conversation with Jacob, where I was speaking with one of his former coaches, who was also on the pro tour. He is a coach somewhere else, and we were talking about, it was related to my day to day work, so not related to data in sports, but the anecdote relates, or transfers, which is like sometimes even the pro tour, you're on these like random tournaments or seemingly random, right? They're not the majors. And he's like, you're out there grinding and you might lose, like you might get knocked out early. But if you take something away from it, like if you learn something about that opponent that you will likely see in the future, or you learn something about yourself that you might not have known in terms of how you might be able to bounce back from being down low 40 in a rally, in a match, or what have you, then that's important to take those lessons. And so I think it's similar again, is like, and to tie to Nikita too. Nikita has his athletes keep a journal. So journal in the morning. Hey, what'd you eat? How'd you prep for the game? After, how did you feel during the game? What happened? And I believe journaling as a modality is very useful. Again, another thing I started doing, I think too late, but I'm glad I did, is then you have something to go back on to document like how you felt and what you learned from it. And I'll tie this just like to the business world too, before we move on, is it was like maybe 10 years ago in the UK, had a quarterly business review, and we gave feedback on like, hey, we should stop doing these three things. And like the team lead was like, was this a waste of time? And I almost like blurted out without thinking, like, no, it's only going to be a waste of time if we don't learn anything from it. If we just like do the same thing over and over and not learn from it, that's a waste of time. But like going through the experience and understanding, like, oh, not good use of our time. Oh, that didn't work out the way we thought to. That is, I believe, a lot of benefit in trying these things too earlier. And like with my sibling, well, my godson Elliot's not quite there yet to be doing these things, but Felix is 2.5, my nephew, and his parents have him do soccer, gymnastics, all these other things. So, like you said, help him develop different motor skills, but then just see what he likes. Like they do painting with him at home, they do all these different things. And I'm not saying that that's the model, it's perfect, but my observation and hindsight of like seeing them and what you're describing, like very much aligns, is like they just want to help not even like nudge him along in the right direction, even though it's 2.5, right? It's just they want to just show him what different things are to see if he
Yeah.
wants to pick up an interest. And one thing he has picked up an interest to is ice hockey. He's like has
Yeah.
his first learn to skate next week, and my brother couldn't be more thrilled. But he wasn't like, you are doing this. And I believe that it's easier said than done, though there's so many examples where like just giving them the experience, even if they're like, this is terrible, at least you know because you
Yeah.
tried it.
Yeah. No, I think you made a great point too about how you talk about your performance after the game, right? Of like that learning mentality around it. I think so many parents will be like, "Hey, well, did you win? Or, did you get any hits? How did you
That was my
play?"
parents. That was our parents. That's what they
Right? And
focused
it's
on.
it's very performance based, it's very outcome based, and that tells the kid, well, like that's what my parents care about is like, did I get a hit or not? Or, did I win or not? Right? Not like what did you learn from this? Or did you have fun? Right? Or did you try your best? Those sort of questions, those subtle things in parenting can make a difference in the kid in the message that it sends to your kid. Right? So exactly what you're describing of seeing your kid and understanding your reasons for why they're in there and understanding sometimes your subtle behaviors around sports. Again, it can be easy to get sucked into, my kid's better than your kid, or I'm paying for the best team, so I got to see the results, right? We're paying this much, we better see, improvement in this kid's statistics, right? But those subtle behaviors, those trickle down, and your kid really understands those and internalizes those, and that just adds to this, like, okay, sports and performance and the outcome of this situation is my identity, right? And being the parent who's there and unconditionally supportive, and you're getting ice cream regardless of if you win or lose on the way home from the game, that's kind of how you can build some more of that, that self-esteem and that confidence in your identity of like, oh, it's not just if I play well, but I tried my hardest, and I had fun and I learned something. Like, that's the key.
Yeah, this I like the framework or mental model of positive feedback loops or just feedback loops in general to ensure that there is some positive reinforcement. Again, not speaking from the perspective of a parent because I don't have kids, though it's just now that I look at in hindsight again as an adult, the impression that this had on me as a kid, it didn't resonate then, but it does now, especially having these conversations, is have some positive reinforcement. Sure, there could be critical feedback as well because
Yeah.
not everything is always perfect. Like that's the
Yeah.
reality of life. So it's what is the feedback loop system? It's like all of this ends up translating later on in life as well, which is why I love the using sports analogies. And yes, they don't always translate, though I believe that there is a place for them in terms of helping for overall development. So before we go into the behind the data, to learn more about you away from data and sports, and you have given a lot of advice already and recommendations, though, are there any top tips or top recommendations or pieces of advice that you'd want to leave people with? If meaning like if they took nothing else from this episode or conversation, what should they think about from the recommendations perspective?
Yeah, I think I touched on a few of them already, but I would add some specific things for parents to just be aware of. Like we just mentioned, you mentioned positive feedback loops. I think, is your positive feedback in response to how well they played or to those habits you mentioned earlier, right? Of trying your best, being a good teammate, giving full effort, right? If your kid only receives positive attention or validation when they play well, then they're going to fuse their identity of I'm only good if I succeed on the field. And that's kind of a crappy thing to have to carry around when you're trying to just go have fun with your friends. So I think that's one thing. I think to add to the variety piece and then the relationship with your kid piece is like a lot of times parents or maybe dads especially will only spend time with their kid on the sports field, right? Do you guys ever spend quality time with each other doing other things besides that, right? Can your kid get the message that, well, my parents want to spend time with me doing other things besides just sports. So if I play poorly, then it's like, oh, well, I just wasted our only quality time together for the week. I think those are good ones. Then I already said praise, positive feedback for things that are not sport related. I think I keep going back to it, but why do you want your kid to go into sport? When you get to the point that I got to, or that you got to, or that Jacob got to when his tennis career was over, how are they going to handle that transition? right? Is it going to be absolutely devastating to lose the one thing that you are good at and the one thing that your parents, connected with you about and the one thing that you could gain self-esteem from? Or is that kid ready to move on to the next phase of their life? It's obviously sad when you can't play competitively anymore, but they're confident in themselves. They're confident in their other skills. They have other passions that they want to pursue. They've really developed strong social skills and they, can go into the world reaping the benefits of sports rather than having it be this backpack on them or this cliff they have to kind of jump over when they get to that age. So for parents to just be reflective of hopefully the lessons that their kids are getting from being in sports.
Yeah, 100%. Life is about lessons in the journey, and everyone's is different, as we know. And that's part of the intention of the episodes is, well, one, not just to speak about sports performance or the performance data component, which is actually what most of the episodes have been about so far. It's to talk about the wide range to help people understand like the different opportunities that exist in sport. I mean, and this is another one too. It's your working on the human performance component for something that's very qualitative, even though there are quantitative ways, as far as I understand it, to measure these different topics
Oh yeah.
and different things. There's many studies similar to the episode with Wheelon Fu from Tottenham Hotspur. He's a performance nutritionist finishing his PhD, and he spoke to a lot of the data being collected from the nutrition component. It's very quantitative, even though people think about nutrition as being very qualitative. And then two, it's to like share these stories and connect dots so that others can learn, one from my mistakes, two from the lessons that other guests have. And before we get into the behind the data, I'll leave it with this: is you meant with Jacob again, is that was a piece of advice that he had, which is what you spoke to, but like, what is the career after? And not just that, how will you deal with the transition? So for him, as far as I remember, and as far as I understand it, it was quite simple. He had this like realization and was just okay with it. But he also gave as a piece of advice, like for college, and I believe this translates throughout, prior to, but especially in college. College is a very special time for a young adult in terms of like finding out the things you like and growing up and all that stuff. He said, if you're an athlete in college, be a student too. Like, do everything. Don't just be the athlete and miss out on the rest of the experience, because there's a lot of value to gain there too. So I really appreciate, Joey, you giving us the lens from the mental performance consultant, clinician perspective. I believe there's a lot more detail we can go into. And so if people are interested to hear more, let's have you back in the future. Maybe we could pick a couple specific topics that they want to hear more about, because again, this is a very important topic for all athletes, I believe people in general, and even in the conversations about performance data with like the performance directors like a Luke Jenkinson or a Darcy Norman or the athletes or former athletes, so much comes back to mindsets like between the ears and the habits and effort, which is related. So this is
Absolutely.
something that we can't forget about. And like you said, it's becoming more prevalent and the pressures are increasing on us humans at a younger age. And social media is a big part of that, but that's that's a topic we'll park for another day,
Yes,
because
absolutely.
that's a contributor for an external factor. So, okay, let's finish with behind the data.
Sounds good.
Even though we've talked about something serious, we've had some fun in terms of talking about collective experiences or positivity around Bruin sport or Boston sports growing up in this area. But let's go
Yep.
behind the data. 4 questions, kind of rapid fire. Starting with, is there a place or a location that is near to you or special to you? And if you want to share why, please do.
Yeah, the place that I thought of immediately was a campus, Boston College, my undergrad, or on a tailgate day. And we just had a tailgate this past Saturday for the game. We did not come out on top. It was kind of a heartbreaker, as it often is at Boston College. But just the energy on campus is a beautiful campus. There's something about like those college football game days. I know that we're not Georgia or Alabama or anything like that, but I remember as a student and still to this day, just like there's an electricity in the air. There's, family, friends, people you haven't seen in a while. There's always good food and good times to be had at that sort of thing. So that's something that kind of takes me back to college, but you can still experience and not feel bad about it as a post grad adult as well.
I think it was it? So we are recording this September 29th. This will air in or publish in November.
Yep.
I was in Newton Center Friday, and so was it the family weekend or like homecoming
It
weekend?
was. I think it was family weekend too. Yeah.
So that probably added to it because you had then like a lot of the alumni who are parents, also kids. And I am with you in terms of just the overall sentiment of the energy and experience. And then specific to BC, I didn't go to college there, though I did tailgate with an alumni who I think is in the Hockey Hall of Fame or Sports Hall of Fame, maybe there. Yeah, great experience for sure. Probably the biggest in Massachusetts, at least when it comes to college football, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. For this region, we're pretty solid, at least for our
Yeah,
experience. Football team, we'll see.
we'll see. Ice hockey team, pretty good.
Yeah.
So for the next question related to food, and it could be homemade or from a specific restaurant, is there like a comfort food you have or something that's a go-to or you just appreciate?
Yeah. Comfort food and something that maybe I can recommend to people if you don't have a lot of time or if you get home late. But if you've ever in the Northeast, they have Cape Cod Cafe frozen pizza. And like,
Yes.
it's not maybe the healthiest option, but it only takes like 12 minutes to cook and it tastes like a real restaurant pizza. It's not a DiGiorno, it's not a Red Baron. It actually to me tastes like a real pizza you'd order from a restaurant. So on a day where I'm, working late, I see a lot of clients in the after school hours. So I get back pretty late to be making dinner. That is one of my go-tos.
Yes, and you could put it on the grill. It actually does work on the grill. I've done it on the grill in the
Exactly.
top grades. That's a really good one. And then the actual location, pretty good too.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so appreciate that, and that one I have had. So, is there a song that puts you in a good mood, or gets you excited, or gets you focused, maybe when you're doing work or what have you? And what is it?
Yeah, this was the hard one. There's so many different things that it could be, like, depends on the vibe. I'm mostly kinda I'm into classic rock, 70s, 60s. What I ended up deciding to go with was anything James Taylor, I think. Just that's, like, the most calming, feel-good type of music to listen to, so it's like Carolina in my mind, or maybe You've Got a Friend. One of those 2 always just, I could lie down and take a nap, or it just feels like everything's peaceful in the world when you listen to something.
Awesome. Okay, that's really cool. Last but not least, is there a book that you've read in the last year or two that has left an impact on you, or left an impression on you, or had an impact that you would want other people to check out?
Yeah, so, we talked a lot about the parenting aspect of things and developing a well-rounded person. I think this book is a little related to that, but it's honestly a little bit more on the mental performance. How do you get yourself, playing your absolute best in whatever sport it is, trying to get out of your own way a little bit mentally. I actually have it right here. It's the Inner Game of Tennis, W. Timothy
Oh
Galway.
yeah.
Classic. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listening maybe have read it. Anybody who's in the mental performance or kind of high performing athletics field has probably looked into it, but this is an older book. Most of the stuff in here really holds up really well. The language it's written in is really good. It's very easy to understand, and it can apply to anything from tennis to, the business world as well.
No, I appreciate that. I saw this on LinkedIn, and I have to check if I did order it or if it's in my like later Amazon basket because I have such a stack of books to get through. So that is not being added to the list. That's being reordered, I think, because a few people have recommended that. So thank
Yeah,
you for
classic.
that, and thank you, Joey, for taking the time. Really do appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, Michael. Thanks for having me. A lot of fun.
Anytime. Thanks.